are you? And where are you going? What do you want?
Hello and welcome to Business Lessons from the Military. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and we're here every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time to talk about military doctrine, history, and the practices of great military leaders, and distill from them lessons that we can apply to our business and professional lives in order to make them more prosperous, make them run better, and keep them at the forefront of our various industries. So today my topic is innovation doesn't mean first. And this I'm going to be using as my basis for today's show, the invention and introduction of jet-powered aircraft in military aviation, which I think will very aptly make my point. So I recently finished reading a book called The Jet Race and the Second World War. So the book is not particularly long. It's about 200 pages, excluding the notes. Actually about 180 pages excluding the notes. It's written by a fellow named Sterling Michael Pavlik. It's a very informative book, although candidly, the way it's written makes it difficult to read. So I slogged through it for your benefit. There were so while I had read quite a bit about aircraft in World War II and the various types, and which included toward the latter part of the war, the introduction of jet aircraft, particularly by Germany. Pavlik's book is a nice summary of the issues. And I boiled all of this reading that I've done over the years into basically 5 points that I think are relevant to our businesses and professional practices. And so I'm going to go through them and show you how the history of the invention of jet aircraft supports my contention. So first of all, we've heard this term servant leader for many years now, and I will be candid, I don't like that term. It implies somehow that leaders serve their people. Now, in some cases, leaders are responsible to their people, but it's not in the way of serving them. It's in the way of essentially making sure that they have the tools and the resources they need to be successful. It's making sure that a leader listens to what the people he leads has to say. Okay, but I don't believe that the leader serves his people in the context of this idea of servant leadership. And nowhere is that more important than in a situation where innovation is necessary, or where shifts in strategic thinking are necessary. Leaders need to first and foremost have a vision of what it is they're seeking to achieve. Okay, this is the crucial aspect of leadership if the endeavor is going to be successful. Okay? Because people need to be able to unite behind this vision. Okay, and this was amply demonstrated in the invention of jet aircraft. So in Britain, there was a young he was the son of a mechanic. He was sort of a self-taught engineer until eventually he was able to take engineering classes at I believe it was Cambridge, but I could be wrong. And his name was Frank Whittle. And Whittle had an idea for creating an engine, a jet-powered engine. And he had this, it was not just an idea, it was a vision. And he largely single-handedly convinced both the British military and people in the aircraft industry to take his vision seriously and to fund his research and to let him really be the one who guided its development. Now, he obviously didn't literally do it alone. He had a lot of other people working with him, but he was the visionary leader. And even though when he finally created, he and his team created a workable jet engine, and the production of that engine was actually turned over to other companies, Frank Whittle continued to be really the leader from an engineering innovation creation standpoint. Okay, now his predecessor on the other side was Hans von Ohain in Germany, who actually, he had the vision for jet propulsion. He actually had it much earlier than Frank Whittle. He started his experiments in the 1930s. That's how early Germany was looking at this new technology. And once again, it was the visionary leadership of Hans von Ohain in Germany that enabled Germany, actually was the first country to fly a jet aircraft successfully. And they were really the only country to use jet aircraft during World War II. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. But the fact of the matter is, Whittle and Ohain for the British and the Germans had this concept of jet propulsion, and they made it become a reality through the tenacity of their leadership. Now, in the United States, I'm sorry, let me take a step back. Both Whittle and Ohain were inventors / engineers. Okay. In the United States, the visionary leader was neither an inventor nor an engineer. It was General Hap Arnold. He was the commanding general of the Army Air Forces. And when he saw what England was developing by way of jet propulsion, he came back to the United States, and it was through his effort that a program of creating a jet propulsion systems was begun and came to fruition here in the United States. So the visionary doesn't necessarily have to be be the person with the skills to be able to make the vision happen. Okay. The visionary needs to be the one who provides the leadership, the stimulus, the ability to bring people together to work on this project to create something new. Okay, that was Frank Whittle in England. It was Hans von Ohain in Germany, and it was General Hap Arnold in the United States. Okay, so which is better? A visionary leader who can also design versus a visionary leader who can't? As I talk about this later, maybe the answer to that question will become clear. But at the outset, it doesn't appear that one is particularly better than the other. Okay, so that's number one. Innovation takes visionary leadership. Okay, but it doesn't mean the innovator or the visionary does not need to be the inventor. Okay, two, the importance of timing. Being first does not assure success. Okay, and that was true in the invention of jet aircraft. So, as I mentioned a moment ago, Germany created the first operable jet engine. They created the first. They flew the first jet propelled aircraft, and yet, in the end, post World War II, the United States, who was actually the third country to begin a jet propulsion program, became the dominant inventor and producer of jet aircraft, and not just military jet aircraft, but civilian jet aircraft as well. Just as an aside, I've been watching a program originally produced in 2011 called Pan Am, and it takes place at the time when Pan Am started flying Boeing 707 commercial jetliners, right? And it's in this commercial jet airliners revolutionized, especially international travel, right? And so it's been interesting. I mean, the show is very melodramatic, but the sort of technical side of it that sometimes comes into play is very interesting. So again, Germany flew planes first, but the United States ended up dominating. And I mean, now there's kind of this duopoly of Boeing and Airbus, and sometimes Boeing is ahead. For the last several years, Airbus has been ahead. So eventually, this European consortium called Airbus caught up and now has, at least for now, surpassed Boeing. But for decades, the United States absolutely dominated in jet aircraft, even though they were the third country to start a jet propulsion program. Now, by the way, to take this into another non-military example, if you ever if you remember a social media platform called MySpace, that was the first social media platform, really. Facebook came along, I think, a couple of years later, completely eclipsed MySpace, and Facebook remains one of the most dominant social media platforms in the world. So again, the first one to do something isn't necessarily the one that becomes the most successful. So why did Germany not end up the number one jet aircraft producer? Well, first of all, although they were the first to fly, Nazi Germany was operating under resource constraints such that they could not really produce jet aircraft in sufficient numbers in order for it to really make a difference in prosecuting the war. So by the time Germany was flying, the most common jet aircraft it flew was the Messerschmitt Me-262. It was a fighter jet platform. The Allies were so dominant with the P-52s. The P-51s, the Mustang, the P-47 Thunderbolt, the F-4U Corsair in the Pacific, the X-66F. They had built so many of these planes that they controlled the skies over Europe and in the Pacific in a way that, having some jet aircraft just couldn't be overcome. And so the resource constraints that Nazi Germany and also, for that matter, Imperial Japan faced, although jet aircraft was not a factor in the Pacific theater, but the resource constraints that these countries faced were as significant in whether innovation was going to help them and whether they were going to be able to take advantage of that innovation as any other factor. So Germany faced fuel shortages for jet aircraft. They had shortages of the materials and metals that were required for the very high temperatures at which jet engines run. All of these things played into the fact that Germany could not build a lot of jet aircraft, and so in the end, they couldn't win back the dominance of the air that was held by the Allies. So innovation not only innovation not only needs to be first. Innovation doesn't need to be first. What it needs to be is something that will make a strategic difference in a situation. So in our businesses, right, innovation needs to make a strategic difference. So I don't know about you, but I play around with AI quite a bit to see how I can use it so I can work more efficiently, right? And it doesn't really matter to me whether I'm the first person to figure something out or the 10th person. What matters to me is that I innovate within my business using new technologies, figuring out new ways to use new technologies so that I can make my business run better, become more efficient, and stay ahead of the pack, right? So that's what matters. And also, innovation needs to be supported by sufficient industrial and logistical capacity so that it can be scaled, especially if you're talking about some sort of large business. So if you're talking about, this is one of the problems with the electric vehicle situation, and why electric vehicle sales have just not kept up with or have not met the projections, et cetera. There is very little logistical support for electric vehicles. So to drive an electric vehicle cross country is a difficult proposition at best, even more so for electric trucks. So there is not at all the infrastructure in the United States to ship goods nationally using electric trucks. So electric trucks are much heavier. They take heavier toll on the roads. That they take a much longer time to charge than the refueling of a diesel truck, and they don't have anywhere near the travel distance that a diesel truck does. So that means even more time charging them. So all of these things, until they're worked out, are likely to prevent the wide adoption of electric vehicles and electric trucks, because the innovation is not supported by industrial and in this example, logistical capabilities, right? So whenever you're looking at an innovation, right, how is it going to play a role, and what is that going to mean in terms of being able to support it so it can actually be relevant to the role that you're hoping it'll play? Okay, next, innovation requires an investment in research and development, and that investment needs to be continual. It can't be fits and starts. So this was another reason why Germany fell behind. So After the war, the German economy was decimated. It did not have the resources to pursue large and ongoing research and development projects. And so it fell behind. As well, there was a huge brain drain out of Germany. Both the Soviet Union and the United States, especially, recruited as many of the scientific and engineering personnel that were driving innovation in Germany as they could. They basically brought them to their respective countries in order to develop those domestic programs. Now, it's interesting to note that although Russia did get, or the Soviet Union did get some of this talent, they really stayed way behind the United States in development. Now, part of the reason was, given a choice, most of the scientists wanted to come to the United States, where they felt they would have freer reign to do their work. And in many cases, they fled from the approaching Soviet army, and tried to essentially find the American line so they could surrender and go to America. So while the German effort did result in the building of the platform I mentioned before, the Messerschmitt ME 262, and then there was a second Messerschmitt that was built. Arado also built a fighter. These really came to naught because after the war, it took quite a long time for Germany to get on her feet economically, and be able to build the kind of sustained research and development program that was necessary. England, too, fell behind, even though it had a jet propulsion program. But England, too, was economically damaged by World War II and didn't have the resources to continue to invest what needed to be invested in research and development. Same with Russia. Really, only the United States ended up after World War II stronger than when it started, at least in terms of its industrial capability and its ability to mount sustained research and development. And so, this was also what helped America become the leader in jet aircraft, because it had the ability year after year, decade after decade, to make these investments. Now, it is interesting to note the United States, although this is not a military example per se, the United States also became dominant in automobiles. And the United States remained dominant in automobiles through the 1960s and into the early 1970s. At the same time, we were helping rebuild the economy, or during which time we rebuilt the economy of Germany and the economy of Japan. And eventually, Japan and Germany became the United States' two biggest competitors in producing and innovating with automobiles. And if you remember the late 1970s and into the 1980s, the Japanese car companies became absolutely dominant in terms of sort of everyday cars, especially Toyota, I believe, by the end of the 1980s was the largest car company in the world, as the big four and then big three U.S. automakers lost ground. Germany became the leader in high-end cars, so Mercedes-Benz, BMW, probably and Porsche, by the way, and Audi, probably among the four best luxury brands, are still the four best luxury brands in the United States. I'm sorry, in the world. You had Rolls-Royce and Bentley in the UK, but those were super luxury. Most people were not of all those. And then you had Lamborghini and Ferrari in Italy. But in terms of luxury brands that became widely adopted, BMW, Mercedes-Benz, Porsche, and Audi. And then eventually Japan entered that market as well with Lexus and Acura, and I'm going up on the other one, which were basically just brands of the big Japanese automakers. So, and the United States car industry, to a certain extent, survives because it produces pickup trucks and SUVs, and also because we don't allow the import of pickup trucks into the United States, right? So the U.S. automakers did not keep up with the R&D investment necessary to build ever more innovative products, whereas Germany and Japan did continue to do so, right? Japan really developed the first somewhat electric vehicle with the Toyota Prius. It's a hybrid vehicle, right? It's not a battery vehicle, but a hybrid vehicle, very, very popular. And it was only with the advent of Tesla and Elon Musk that the United States started to become a place where automobile innovation was happening again. But if you look at some of the electric vehicles of the big three automobile companies like the Chevrolet Volt and stuff, these cars were disasters. People didn't want them. They were too expensive. And indeed, with the exception of Tesla, the electrical vehicles sold in the United States by the big three auto companies, they lose tens of thousands of dollars on each vehicle. So these are not economically viable products. And part of the reason is because the research and development, the ongoing innovation that's necessary has not been taking place in the United States, right? So the example from the development of jet aircraft is one, an industry has to continually be pursuing research and development, right? This is why, by the way, Boeing, despite its problems, is still staying competitive with all of a sudden I've gone up on the name of the European with Airbus. So things like the 787, I actually got to fly on one. It is an amazing aircraft. The materials technology that makes it so much lighter than other aircraft, but stronger, which means it uses less fuel, so it's more fuel efficient. The comfort of the seating and the ability for the lights to change in the cabin to simulate how the day is changing. All of these things, very innovative. It is an amazing aircraft. Now, I will be, full disclosure here. I'm a Boeing fan in the commercial jet duopoly, but I've never been on an Airbus aircraft that impressed me as much as the 787. So, and even the 777, the 747. These were amazing innovations in aircraft technology, and so while Airbus has done some things, the real technological breakthroughs continue to really come from the United States, and generally what happens is Airbus sort of looks at what Boeing's doing and then tries to horn in on their market. What's interesting is at a time when Boeing was scaling back on super jumbo jets like the 747, Airbus decided on I think it was the 380. I want to say it was a huge jet. The program has not worked out well. They've sold very few of them. And it was because I think the leadership at Airbus didn't recognize what the leadership at Boeing did, which is that in order for commercial aviation to stay viable, things like resource constraints had to be looked at much more closely, and these were much more important for the financial stability or the ability of airlines to grow than having a huge plane that they could fly. And so uh, not as huge planes that are very fuel efficient, that allow for schedule flexibility. That is what allows airlines to stay economically viable and or to grow. Okay, so continual research and development is important. The next thing is the adoption, the adaptation to challenges. So um, when jet aircraft first started flying in World War II, again, basically by Germany, so the logistical challenges of them had been largely overlooked. So, for example, the range of these aircraft was very short, especially compared to piston engine aircraft. As well, the maintenance needs were very high. So, generally speaking, a jet engine had to be completely rebuilt after running for 10 hours. Okay, that means 10 hours of flight time, basically. So, when you think about it, if a jet aircraft would fly for about an hour and a half, and that might be all it could fly because that's all it had fuel and range to cover, still that meant basically after 6 to 7 flights that engine had to be totally rebuilt. This was far more frequent than the maintenance needs of piston engines. And so what that meant is you needed even more jet aircraft to operate, against piston aircraft, which didn't have anything like the downtime. So these, and by the way, these same kind of constraints applied to the early English and American aircraft. The Gloucester Meteor was the first UK platform. The Bell P-59 Aero Comet, that was the first US jet platform. They had high maintenance needs, short ranges, but in the end, it didn't matter for the English and the Americans because we had such dominance in piston aircraft, both in numbers and in quality. And so the fact that jet aircraft needed posed such huge challenges to them being widely adopted didn't matter because we didn't need to widely adopt them. Okay, so it's all good and well to have disruptive innovation in your business, but we also need to adapt to what that means, logistically and in the deployment of that technology, so that it can actually become a part of our businesses, right? So to take AI as an example, AI can do a lot of things, but can AI do it in a way that's faster, more efficient, higher quality? And if so, can it do it in a way that doesn't absorb even more resources so that net we're not really making any gains? Okay, so that's really in the adoption of new technology. New technology is great, but if it's going to take if there's going to be such huge challenges to adapting to it, it may make it difficult for that innovative technology to be useful, right? So both of those have to go hand in glove in order for innovation to be useful. And then finally, one last lesson I want to talk about from this. So in reality, what drove the adoption of jet propulsion was necessity. So Germany saw that it was losing out in the piston engine powered aircraft in World War II. And so it needed to come up with something that would give it a chance of obtaining air dominance and taking that away from the Allies. And so this was one of the reasons why Adolf Hitler eventually got behind jet propulsion. Now, it's interesting that when Germany started, taking flights, jet-powered flights, what von Ohain had in mind was jet fighters. They were small and so didn't take as big a power plant, et cetera, for them to work. When Hitler learned that jet flight was successful, what he wanted was jet bombers, to the point where he basically put out like a memorandum, an edict is really what it was, saying that jet propulsion would be used to build bombers. Now, interestingly enough, and this shows you a little bit about how dictatorships work, the people involved with innovating jet aircraft essentially ignored that edict by Hitler and continued to work to create jet fighters. And eventually, when they got a jet fighter that was operable, the Me-262, they basically used that to convince Hitler to allow them to produce these fighters. So, oftentimes it's necessity that will drive innovation. But so, as we look at this, as we look at our businesses, if we hit a crisis point in business, that's a time to really look at what would get us out of this crisis. And that's essentially what Germany said. What would get us out of this crisis of lacking air dominance? Well, if we could come up with a platform that's much, much faster than what the Allies are flying, that could give us that could help us regain air dominance, right? And so that's what really was the driving force behind the jet propulsion program in Germany, and what pushed it to become first. Now, it's interesting to note, for both the United States and England, there wasn't really that necessity per se. First of all, they didn't know until very late in the war that Germany had successful jet flights. Now, they were aware of the V1s and the V2s, which were really more rockets than jets in that sense. But in any event, the United States and England, they were not under the burden of necessity. And so that's why they lagged, at least time-wise, initially in creating their jet propulsion programs. But in the end, okay, the United States became dominant, as I noted before. So when our business or professional practices hit a point of crisis, that is a time to re-examine our R&D, what efforts we're making at innovation, because maybe some kind of innovation will get us out of that crisis. Okay. And by the way, if Germany had not been so resource constrained, and if they had been able to build jet aircraft in large numbers, it's pretty clear that they could have regained air dominance. And what that would have meant for how the war worked out, it might have turned the war around. It would seem to almost certainly it would have lengthened the war. And so sometimes, if our businesses are in a point of crisis and we come up with an innovation that we think can get us out of the crisis and put us back on top, as long as we're making sure we can adapt to the challenges of implementing that innovative technology, we may be taking almost a quantum leap with our businesses by looking at innovation through those lenses. So the invention of jet aircraft in World War II, I think, is a very strong example of how innovation works in practice and the kind of issues that we need to be aware of as we pursue a program of continuous research and development, and build the kinds of businesses that are always looking at how we can innovate, how we can create more with perhaps fewer resources, and therefore make our businesses more client responsive, more resource what's the word? More using less resources and more productive, and using resources more productively, and therefore staying at the forefront of our industries. So, if I had thought about it, I had some models of some of these. I just occurred to me. I have a huge, not a huge, but I have about 400 model aircraft stored away in my garage. They're not out. I should have gone and dug out some of the early jet aircraft models so you could see what they looked like. Hopefully I'll remember to do that next time I do a show based on something where I have models to show you. But in any event, the adoption of jet propulsion is a fascinating story. And if you're at all interested in military history, I encourage you to read up on it. There's a whole and I just realized there's a whole series of short books, and I'm gonna get you the name of them while we're while we're here toward the end of the show. It's a series of books on individual aircraft, and you can read about each one. And okay, yeah, here we go. And Schiffer, Military History and Squadron Signal Publications. So I'll put those names in the show notes, so that if you're interested in reading up on some of these aircraft, you can. Each book is about 60 to maybe 80 page, no, not even 80. I think it's like 60 to 70 pages. A lot of pictures, so they're really interesting because you can see a lot of what the writer is writing about. Like I'm just looking at my list here of some of the ones I've read. The F-84 Thunderjet, one of the early U.S. Fighter jets. Of course, the B-52 Stratofortress, which was a jet engine bomber. Let's see, what are the other ones I have? Oh, the U-2 spy plane, of course, and the SR-51 Blackbird. Here, actually, let's see if I can get it. Here, I'm going to duck down for a moment. So here's, this was the SR 71 A. This is the A by Lockheed Martin. It's known as the Blackbird. This was one of the most innovative military jet spy platforms that really has ever been. It's quite a beautiful jet. And here you can see it from the top, from the side, from the front. You can see the very narrow radar signature, not narrow, but the very small radar signature it had, which made it very difficult to track. So, this was kind of the state of the art of U.S. jet technology, during its time. So, anyway, I like I said, I could have brought out more of these, I realized, but oh well, that's but it's fun. It's fun to read about these things and look at them and understand how they impacted, how they impacted not just warfare, but eventually the civilian economy, and how the lessons that we can learn from them impact our own businesses. So I thank you very much for joining me today. Especially my live viewers. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific time, tomorrow Wednesday, 10 a.m. Pacific time, is my show, People Making Money. We're going to be doing our monthly economic echoes, looking at the economic data and seeing how what that means in terms of our own lives. We don't live the national economy; we live our own individual economies, and so how various things like inflation, unemployment, and such affect us is different for each of us and our as individuals, and of course our families. So I hope you'll join me for that. So once again, thanks so much for joining me. If you have questions, comments, feel free to drop them in our social media. Drop me an email. All of those links will be in the show notes after the show posts. You can listen to replays of the show on YouTube as well as Spotify and Apple Podcast. If you have someone you think it would be interested in the show, share with them a link from one of those podcasting sources, and maybe they'll benefit from you letting them know about the shows. So, wishing you a wonderful rest of the day. Hope to see you tomorrow. And signing off as I always do, Marie, darling, you are my belle. Courage at all times, my friends.